Welcome to Heist the podcast where you will learn about the greatest heist in human history.
Today, we're diving into one of the most audacious acts of defiance in all of World War II. A true story that, honestly, feels more like a Hollywood thriller than a history lesson.
And it all starts with a number. Just look at this. 354 million euros. That's the estimated modern-day value of the biggest bank heist in history. But this story isn't really about the money, not at its heart.
No, it's about this question. What if the goal wasn't to get rich, but to keep a nation's hope alive? What happens when ordinary people are pushed to do something truly extraordinary?
To really get this heist, you have to understand just how desperate the situation was. Okay, so picture this. It's the autumn of 1944 in the Netherlands. The Allied advance has completely stalled out, plunging the country into what would become a brutal hunger winter. To make matters worse, the Dutch government in exile calls for a massive railway strike. 30,000 workers walk off the job, paralyzing the German war machine. A heroic move, right? But it meant their families had no income. The Dutch resistance was trying to support them, but their funds were basically gone. And the kicker? The Germans were doing the exact opposite, hoarding a fortune in a tiny provincial bank, thinking it was the safest place in the world.
The entire resistance movement, the very hope of a nation, was on the brink of collapse, not from bombs or bullets, but from something as simple as running out of cash. If that strike failed, morale would shatter, the fight would be over. They needed a miracle.
And that miracle? Well, it wasn't going to come from a general or a spy. It was going to come from a man who knew his way around a bank vault.
Meet Derk Smoes. I mean, this guy was the perfect man for the job because he was literally living a double life. By day, he's this trusted employee at the bank in Almelo. He knows the routines, the layout, the staff, everything. But by night, he's a district commander for the resistance. And as a husband and a father of 3, he was putting absolutely everything on the line.
Smoes' plan was, well, it was surgical. It was built entirely on his insider knowledge. We're not talking explosions or shootouts here. He knew to go in right at closing time when security was at its most relaxed. Use the side staff door, not the main one. Quietly overpower the staff. And then have a truck ready at the exact right moment to load up and just vanish. It was a plan built on precision, not brute force. And the team that Smoes put together, this wasn't some gang of hardened criminals. These were ordinary people. A police officer who refused to hunt down Jewish citizens, farmers who would later hide the money, just neighbors who decided they couldn't stand by and do nothing anymore. They were driven by a sense of duty, not by greed.
So, with the plan set and the team assembled, the stage was ready for what would become the most audacious robbery of the entire war.
On a cold, misty November evening, they put the plan into action, and it went almost perfectly. They got inside, controlled the staff, opened the vault. But here's the heart-stopping moment. As they're loading 13 heavy chests of cash into the truck, a German patrol marches right past them. In the rain and fog, the soldiers didn't notice a thing. Can you imagine the silence? And just 75 minutes after they walked in, the team drove off into the darkness, having pulled off the impossible.
The final tally was just staggering. 46,150,000 guilders. It was more than they could have ever dreamed of. Enough to fund the railway strike and the entire resistance for months to come.
Now, to put that into perspective for you, this single heist brought in a sum far, far greater than even the famous Great Train Robbery in Britain, which happened almost 20 years later. In one night, these citizen soldiers had pulled off the biggest cash grab in history.
They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. But, and this is a big but, their triumph was going to be tragically short-lived.
And the craziest part? They weren't caught because of a mistake during the heist. The plan itself was flawless. Their downfall came from something completely unrelated. A single domino falling hundreds of kilometers away that would bring their whole world crashing down. So, here's how it all unraveled. A resistance fighter was arrested in another city. Under brutal torture, he broke, and he revealed the location of the hidden money, a haystack on a farm out in the countryside. The Germans raided the farm, and sure enough, they found every last guilder. But worse, much worse, they also found Derk Smoes and his second-in-command, Dunaway Mick, who just happened to be there guarding the loot.
But the story gets even more heartbreaking. At first, the Germans didn't know who they had. Smoes was using a fake ID and was apparently just moments from being released. But then, a local Dutch collaborator,
Smoes' own neighbor walked into the room, pointed at him, and said 3 words, "That is Smoes." That is Smoes. And just like that, his fate was sealed.
The money was gone, the leaders were captured. But the story, man, it doesn't end there, because the true value of this heist was never really about the cash.
The human cost was just devastating. The captured men were sent to the notorious Neuengamme concentration camp. Derk Smoes, Douwe Mick, the farmer who hid the money, the getaway driver, they all perished in the final hellish weeks of the war, dying from disease and starvation just before liberation could reach them.
You know, one of the few team members who survived the war, a man named Herman Hoften, he explained it so simply. He said, "I was afraid, but you did it because you had to." And that just captures their spirit perfectly, doesn't it? These weren't fearless superheroes. They were terrified, ordinary men who overcame that fear because they felt they had no other choice. So this brings us to the central paradox of the whole thing. As a strategic operation, it was a total failure. The resistance never got to use a single cent of that money. But as a symbol, it was an astonishing success. The news of the heist spread like wildfire, giving a nation on its knees this incredible story of courage. It proved the occupier wasn't invincible, and it fueled the will to keep fighting.
And that leaves us with one last question to think about. In the end, this heist wasn't about the 46 million guilders that were lost. It was about the priceless story of defiance that was gained. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important victories aren't the ones you can count.